The TEFL Commute, Season 6, Episode 3, Teacher or Therapist, in which we look a little bit at psychology. Are you ready? Off we go. Hey, Lindsay. Oh, no, it's not Lindsay, is it? Hi, Ceri.
Hi there. You can call me Lindsay if you want.
No, it's quite nice. We've got rid of him. We can do what we like. He's away.
Well, the cat's away.
Exactly.
Psychological.
Yeah, that's right. I would see, because normally at this point he would go, "Hi, I'm Lindsay, and this is the TEFL Commute, and we talk. And this is a podcast in which the subject of teaching might come up, but he's away, so the subject of teaching will come up." I think is what we can say. Yeah. And it's a strange thing that it's a topic that he actually wanted to do, and he's buggered off. So he's left us to look at it.
Well, there we are. You'll just have to put up with what we've got to say.
Yeah, so we're calling this episode Teacher or Therapist, and as I said, Lindsay was the one that kind of, when we go through the topics at the beginning of a season, what shall we talk about? He said, let's talk about Teacher or Therapist, because he'd read this article in English Teaching Professional, which was called that, and it was about the idea of one-to-one teachers, especially being kind of a therapist more than a teacher. So I like the idea of it, and I'm sure you've got a lot to say. So Ceri, Teacher or Therapist, which are you?
Definitely teacher. But I think we can all identify with those like one-to-one students who really just want to be listened to. So you think like, well, they might as well have a couch, and you might as well just, and you know, like you're there, and then every now and then you feed in a question or two, and they really don't look like they want you to teach them anything at all. I had one wonderful student who told me so much about Argentinian history and art, and she would just talk for an hour practically non-stop. I don't think we got much into therapy though.
I was going to say, yeah, I've had one-to-one students like that that have told me things, but then it's when they say, "Oh yeah, and I've just committed to building a new house, and I've taken out a mortgage for, and now I don't know what to do." And I think that at that point the line is crossed, isn't it? And they're looking at you as for some advice more than just being a teacher. I would say. You know what? I've just said, going backwards. I'm rude. There are people who might not know who you are, Ceri. I mean, you've been on the podcast from time to time all the while we've been going. But do you want to just say who you are?
Okay, hi, I'm Ceri. And I work on and off with Lindsay and with you, Shaun, sometimes. Yeah. I'm a teacher, trainer, materials writer. I've been teaching for 30 years or more now. In fact, I recently decided to stop celebrating my birthday and to start celebrating the number of years I've been teaching, because that's good then, because the next one will be 31. And I'm not going to tell you what it would be if it was my birthday.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but we're all of an age these days, you know. I think one of the things you teach, where I don't anymore, is perhaps you have a lot more connection to teenagers and that kind of teaching where you're based, if I remember rightly. So would you say that there's a lot of we just talked about this one-to-one kind of therapy idea? Does this happen in teenage in when you find it as well? I mean, it's something that comes up. I think we hear a lot in state school teaching, but about language teaching, are we therapists in a teen classroom?
I think in a very different way, aren't we? Because it's not the one-to-one, although, I mean, I don't know, some people do one-to-one teenage classes as well, but I'm pretty sure that they're not going to be the therapist-type conversations. But when you're dealing with like a class of teenagers, there's so much psychology involved in it as well. The whole group dynamic thing, the making sure that there's no cliques forming, the whole kind of including everybody, and then so many issues of motivation and development. Where are they at? It's complicated, and teen psychology is complicated, you know.
All of which we're obviously completely trained to deal with, I suspect.
Well, looking at the an EFL classic kind of private language school teaching, most of us won't have been.
No, exactly. Yeah, I think if we're coming from that background, I mean, then there's certainly there's very little of it on any of the training courses I've ever actually done or run, to be honest. So
well, I actually started off doing a PGCE, so I actually chose to be an L1 English teacher first in secondary school. So I do actually have some of the background of like India, a 9-month university-based course, and it does. I think it does make a difference. It did make me feel much more confident in my first years of teaching going into a teenage class compared to colleagues.
So was that specifically kind of input sessions then on the things you've just talked about, looking at cognitive development and emotional development?
Yes, exactly, and then it kind of gives you a grounding, I think, to be able to learn more about it on your own, as it were. You know, having got, because God, I did the PGCE, 30-odd years ago. So that's all very old, and it'll be completely out of date. And yes, but at least I feel like I have some kind of grounding. But recently, I was working with a teacher who's new to TEFL, but her background was psychology. It's really interesting listening to her take on classroom dynamics with especially teenagers. Okay.
And her take would be what? Why would it be different from what we might know?
I think you come at it more from the kind of the clash of the individual and the group and all of the mechanics that are happening in there not from a language point of view at all, but from how they're responding to each other, how they respond to the teacher, your role in. I mean, it's immensely complicated, isn't it? It's something that we'll try and work out for ourselves. And you have to, it's kind of, sometimes you feel like you're the one who needs the therapist,
Yeah, we might get to us needing therapy later in the podcast. I'm intrigued. Because obviously this idea of therapy, the psychological aspect of education, especially, is something that is kind of du jour, isn't it? It seems to have come. I think things come in and out of education, and at the moment, for me, this kind of topic of therapy, psychology, well-being, mindfulness, all these things is the one that seems to be talked about from it. So it would seem that therefore there's a reason that it's something that we should be really concentrating on. No, so is it something that we're doing poorly in our profession that we need to kind of take a big look at and change stuff on? Because it's something in, say, mainstream education, we've now got educational therapists working along, but I guess the difference in the education that we have is that we see our students so little, whereas they see their students so much.
I think there's one thing that we kind of do as humanistic communicative teachers, is that we invest in what I think you'd call like a safe environment, and that actually chimes in a lot with what people are talking about at the moment, I think, in the media. This idea of making sure that every single student in your class feels that they're safe to make mistakes, that you're invested in them, that you're giving them hope, that you're giving them this kind of like can-do attitude. That then all of that, I think, is something that's pretty much imbibed into TEFL anyway. If you're kind of, especially if you're like a humanistic,
yeah, I think so.
TEFL teacher, then all of those things are things that for quite some time have been really important in smaller groups. It's when you get to have a class of 35 or 40, then you have the challenge of being able to do the same thing with a larger group. And I think that's something, wow, that's like really admirable when you see teachers who are dealing with classes that size and bigger.
I guess another way of looking at it is going back to where I started rather than perhaps the teen element, is should teachers who are not really trained to be therapists be walking into that area? So when my one-to-one student starts telling me about all their financial woes, should I, say, should it be more of a case of, hang on, I'm a teacher, I'm not trained to deal with this, or am I actually am I likely to cause more issues by by jumping in there as well? And
it's also that thing of like, okay, this problem that the student is just kind of delivered me, put on a plate in front of me. What am I supposed to do with it if I?
Yeah, exactly.
I just correct the English?
Just correct the English. I think this is a good time to just have a listen to this.
What is it? What's the matter?
My family.
Yeah?
My family all dies in crash.
In a crash.
In a crash, my family died.
Yeah, you'd probably say have died, actually. You'd probably use the past perfect. It's an action that happens in the recent past that's still the case now. Your family is still dead. So you'd say, my family have all died in a crash.
Okay, so that was a clip from, I forgot what it's called. What's the comedy show called, Kerry? Smack the Pony, that's it. Yeah, I knew it'd come from it somewhere. And I think that's brilliant. I'm glad you showed me it, but it's something we hear all the time in kind of training, isn't it? It's this idea of listening. And goes back to what you were saying just before the break. Should I correct the English or not?
Yeah, that's a pretty full-on example there, isn't it? Well, if you're being really nitpicky, she also made a grammar mistake in that. But anyway, we'll let that pass. But yeah, I mean, it also makes me think of those situations. I don't know if this is a cultural thing. I don't know if you've come across it or not. But in Spanish and Italian classrooms, you may have a student come into the group and kind of openly announce some bad news. And I know that sometimes kind of some teachers are taken aback by that, and they don't really know how to cope with it, or sort of they announce a death in the family.
Oh, right. So even though the students might not know the family, they'll just come in and tell you this anyway.
Yes, and then it's almost as if it, and that's fine for the community of students there, and they'll react, but I've seen kind of younger teachers who maybe not so used to that kind of news being broadcast, not really knowing how to cope with the situation, and so it's kind of that clip is a slightly extreme example of it. But I can think of situations where, like the actual situation, maybe something that's happened in the news and, kind of really affects the students that you're working with, and what exactly do you do, sort of how do you handle those kind of very very sensitive, delicate situation.
This idea of listening is an active listening is actually an interesting area as well. I remember doing a course many years ago that was one of the part of it was listening, the different ways to actually listen to people and respond to it. And I found it really fascinating simply because of the different levels you can have of listening. And again, I don't think it's, unless you've actually kind of explored active listening, it's difficult to understand what that means and how to react in different situations. And we, as you say, as teachers, we're put in that situation all the time. Really, I'm going to go back to the clip that reminds me of a CELTA. When you're almost first day of CELTA teaching practice. This is true. The trainee teacher was teaching the past simple, and she'd asked the students to make some sentences. Well, going over the past simple with the students who clearly knew the past simple, but the students had to create sentences with the past simple. And one of the student sentences was, "My cat dies yesterday." Genuinely, she was like, "My cat dies yesterday," and so rather, and we're talking about listening, and of course the teacher, the trainee teacher, keen to show that they knew what the past simple was. Like, "You mean died? My cat died yesterday. Died. Come on, drill it." It's like
exactly the same. But you can imagine, that situation is where you're kind of so totally focused on the language that you just don't feel.
Exactly. Yeah.
Be a person at the same time.
it's kind of so teachers should listen to content and not judge the content, I think, is what we're going there. But I think we're talking about there. We're listening. There's this, you kind of mentioned it again, this idea of listening to each other. I mean, when we talk about therapy, I think especially in a staff room, we tend to become therapists for each other, don't we? I mean, the staff room is a place to kind of release and get rid of all the tension from a class, and you end up having to listen to colleagues. Sorry, you end up having to. That sounds very negative, but you know what I mean. I've got 5 minutes and want a coffee. What's up? But would you agree that there is that kind of teacher therapy relationship as well?
I think it's really healthy where it is, isn't it? I think it's kind of. It's one of those health factors, I think, in a school, is if there is a space where the teachers do feel like they've got a private space and they can talk to each other, and that's not always. Some schools don't have staff rooms.
No,
some
that's
schools
very true.
Don't have coffee breaks scheduled at the same time or whatever it is that, like, so don't don't organise teacher development moments with that kind of, you know, the more social side to it. And I think it's really important, isn't it? I think, you know, I don't think I've ever worked anywhere where I didn't have that. I'd hate not to.
No, and certainly. Well, I mean, I don't have that now in my current environment. Well, I guess the podcast is my therapy. When Lindsay and James have to listen to all my teaching issues with it. I agree. I think there's what I certainly. I just thinking about it. I certainly think yes, we need that release, but I think there's a danger as well. Going back to how we treat students. I mean, we talked in the beginning in a bit about, especially with teens, about the cognitive development, their emotional development, and whatever. And it's very easy for within that for one teacher to get an impression of a student that's completely different from you know, you and I could have the same student and we see them in different ways. And I think one of the dangers, in inverted commas, of this kind of staff room releasing of tension is that the students can get accidentally labelled in one way, maybe wrongly, because there's a different relationship between that teacher and that student. And, you know, if one of the things that we're talking about, if we're talking about psychology, is dealing with self-esteem and motivation and confidence and all that kind of thing, it's kind of like Chinese rumors that this student gets labeled, Chinese whispers, gets labeled as a bad student and so on. So I think we've got to be, you know, it's this idea of listening and understanding with it. So I think it's definitely an important part of being an educationalist, is sharing experiences and stuff. But there are some things I think we need to be careful of.
Well, it's kind of the upside and the downside of the rant, isn't it? You know, because it's good to have a rant every now and then, and that, you know, people need to let off steam, but you need to somehow signpost it. You know, like, okay, this is a rant now, and I'm not going to mean half of what I say anyway, and it's going to. But just let that person get it off their chest. And it's just when sometimes you have that spiraling thing where the complaints just spread, and that can be really negative. That can be worse than no contact, can't it?
So is it the manager's job then? I mean, well, the director of studies, the line manager, the academic manager, whatever you want to call them, is it their job to be the listeners more than perhaps the teachers in the staff room?
Interesting. I don't know. With that hat on, I would say that maybe that you might want to be taking the temperature of conversations in the staff room, but you don't want to be. You also want to be part of the conversations if you can be, and that can be quite difficult if there's a them and us kind of situation, that you don't want that to build up either. And you can possibly be someone who kind of helps make the atmosphere more positive, maybe. I don't know. It's a very difficult one, that, isn't it? Because also, you know, some managers who try to do that because the textbook has told them that they have to, and it just ends up sounding kind of false, you know, sort of, oh, page 5 told me to go in on Friday mornings and tell everyone to enjoy their weekend, you know, sort of. And I can remember someone, in fact, ranting about a manager that they had like that years ago. I'm not going to say in which school. And it was kind of, yeah, it's a really fine balance, isn't it? And
it is. It completely is. And I think we've all. I mean, I do a lot of management training, and this idea. I mean, I think you've got the old managers that are set in their ways and probably do it, like you say, from page 5 or whatever, and then you've got the new managers that want to be different and perhaps then try too hard and become too familiar, and you know, and it, you know, you just don't want them being that therapeutic in front of you. It's like, go away and let me vent with my colleague, kind of thing.
Students don't necessarily want you to be their friend. So it's like with going back to teaching teenagers again.
Yeah.
Like, no, you're their teacher. That's who they want you to be. They want you to be their teacher, you know. And in some cases, you're their manager, and they want you actually to be the manager and kind of make it clear as to where everybody stands. So it's kind of how far you can cross that boundary or not. Oh, very, very complex, isn't it?
So I think let's just take a step back from the complexity for a moment. Let's listen to the angels' voices come in and hear some wisdom.
Today's young people will someday ask for annoying metaphors.
Yeah, it's still soothing. Might be the sixth season, but whenever I hear the angels' voices, it's that moment. And I'm going to say this deliberately. It's that moment just to take a breath and reflect, because I think that's kind of we've talked about therapy and whatever. And I think we in this final part, we've skirted around it. But again, one of those issues that's come up quite a lot of late, and everybody is rightly talking about it now is this idea of the mental health of a teacher. And if we are being therapists and dealing with all the emotional baggage of everybody else, and no matter what, and with everything else we do, then there are possibilities that the teachers are going to start struggling from kind of burnout and mental health issues, aren't there?
Well, there are scary statistics from mainstream education, aren't there?
Oh yeah.
Burnout.
Do you have them at hand?
Hold on. So I've got one here is 70% of teachers and lecturers say their health suffered because of their job. And that's from Lovewell. I was reading one about Scotland, which was saying 50%, but that would in fact, they were saying that was terrible, and it sounds terrible, but it's much better than 70. Record rates of burnout as well here, and teachers leaving the profession and not being able to recruit teachers, and there's a lot of kind of bad news out there, isn't there, about that?
There's a lot of bad news about it, but the bad news is always good in the sense that it does make us think about it. So those stats and those statistics and stuff that you're coming from, they were from a talk given by Sarah Mercer, and luckily enough, I've got Sarah here to talk more about teacher well-being. So I'm with Sarah Mercer, author of Exploring Psychology in Language Learning and Teaching, many other things, and she's, as I told you just before we started recording, Ceri and I have been talking about well-being, and I think any time that we talk about teacher well-being at the moment, you're one of the few people I think actually stood up and banging a drum for teacher well-being. It seems to have become a rather relevant topic over the last year or so. Is that because of teacher burnout? Is it because you quote 70% burnout? There are articles in the Guardian that Ceri and I have just been talking about the fact that education is running teachers down. Is it just everybody's suddenly gone, oh, well-being, or is it been sort of bubbling under for a while?
It's hard to say, to be honest, but I think it's sort of bubbling under generally. So I've just done a talk in Malta where I was talking about well-being as a 21st century life skill. And when I was preparing the talk, I started to see how much, at least lip service is given to well-being in various curriculums across the globe from the learner perspective. So I think well-being has taken has become center stage of the agenda for learners, and it's on a lot of curriculum now, but we still haven't really been talking about teachers so much. Teacher burnout's been a big thing in education for a long while, and in general education, certainly not in ELT yet. And I think the other thing that's happened at the same time has been the growth of the positive psychology movement.
Right.
Positive psychology was started basically with Martin Seligman, who criticized the fact that psychology as a discipline was taking very much a deficit approach. So looking at what was wrong and how to remedy that and get people back to average. And it wasn't looking at how people were doing really well, what that meant to do really well in life, and the term he uses is flourish. And that certainly has been a massive impetus for the well-being movement.
And I mean, a lot of... without doing that, I mean, it's something I believe in, mainly because I've read your books and seen a lot of people talk about it. But, some people would say that, well-being, another one of these kind of psycho-babble things, and things are with it. I mean, how would you deal with people that say that kind of thing?
Well, I'd probably say how incredibly short-sighted, but it's not the first time that you have people that think that this is pop psychology and happyology. But that's happyology, and it's not. And to be fair, that's not what positive psychology is about. It's not saying that there's any way you can't deny the negatives. It's not to negate the negatives that take place in life, because that's part of life, and they actually serve a useful function in our psychologies. But it's about getting some kind of balance and looking also at the positives. And there's plenty of good research to support this. I think that's one of the things that the positive psychology movement has been very keen to do is, because it's got sort of some of the roots in humanism and humanistic psychology, they were aware of the critiques that they received about not being very scientific in those days. So one of the things the positive psychology movement has done is emphasize very strongly the need to have empirical support to get research to support the claims that they're making. And so I think that's been very defining in the character of positive psychology as a movement. I think some of it gets misappropriated. I don't know if I've probably also myself made mistakes and naively misinterpreted things along the way. I think there's always a danger that if you've got, 1 hour to talk about something, naturally you have to simplify issues to get a message across.
Absolutely.
And I think there is a danger that in these little snapshot insights to things that people get a rather simplified view. And I'm sure that I'm myself guilty of doing that, but you can't then in a 1 hour talk start going into all the...
I think where I was coming from is that I think if I think back over my many years as a teacher, I think if I went to my school director and started talking about teacher well-being, they might look at me like I'm mad. I think the tip. I come from a private language school background, which tend to be, people who have done 4-week training course, want to live in a country primarily. They were, and the average private language school timetable wants people working on sociable hours because they're before and after normal school or work. They have split shifts, and I can imagine going to some of my old school directors going, I need a better work-life balance. And they just laughing me out the door. And I think that's where I was thinking about the idea of how people might see it as happyology, as you call it. Just like, oh no, I don't want that teacher, and I found myself out of work.
No, I think that's a very real problem. And I think there's a few things about this. Is we don't really talk much about mental health. So I think mental health is still one of our last remaining taboos, in that we don't address it head on. We don't normalize it in terms of, we don't talk about it very openly. We don't make this an issue that workplaces have a responsibility for workplace mental well-being. We need to first of all make that sort of step, I think, to make people understand that physical and mental well-being are two sides of the same coin, and that mental well-being is as equally important as physical well-being. And that it's actually very simple. If you want teachers to teach to the best of their ability, and if you therefore want learners to learn to the best of their abilities, you want teachers to be in the right kind of place to teach. Because you simply teach better. You can be more creative, more effective. There's quite a lot of research that shows that learner achievement goes up. Discipline problems go down when the teacher's in the right kind of place, because you can deal with things differently. So I think, we're at the beginning of a journey where we need to start raising people's awareness about the importance of well-being, that it's not something hicky and fringe, but this is actually fundamental to our ability to teach well. And it's a responsibility of the workplace to create the kind of conditions that help support that. Now, it's not going to be easy to change that. And there are always going to be some compromises along the way. So I don't want to sort of oversimplify this, but if we can start talking about this and make it an issue, make it things that directors of studies and heads of language schools talk about, that they're aware of. And I've got to say, the fact that some people are approaching me and saying, I've heard you talk about teacher wellbeing, I'd like you to come and talk to my staff. I think it would be good for them to hear. And that's very reassuring to me, that people are starting to take it seriously and say, yeah, actually, it's not just always about the learner. It's also about my staff and the responsibility I have to my staff. And ultimately, good staff in a good place mentally and physically means that you have happy learners.
There's another thing that you do talk about these negatives a lot, but I think every time I've seen you talk, you begin almost saying like, teachers matter, you matter, and I think we should look at the positive part of this, that it is that the teachers that matter, isn't it? And I think people are learning that it's important. For it. Let's just, I don't have it for long, I know. So I'm just thinking, okay, so we talked about this idea that educating language school owners and director of studies is beginning to seep in. But what advice might you give a teacher who wants to kind of deal with their own well-being, maybe doesn't have the opportunities of an open-minded director of studies? Where can they start? Are there steps that they can take on their own? Does it need to be a school-wide implementation?
Ideally, you want the support of the environment that you're working in. So one of the things that makes me a little bit nervous is that a lot of the advice that I find I'm giving and that you receive online is all directed at the individual, because that's something you can control and something you have an impact over. But really, this ought to be taking place more systematically on the level of institutions and organizations as well. Right. As an individual, there's plenty of there's plenty of great websites. There's apps available now. There are things. I mean, you have to be a bit of a discerning customer, but there are plenty of things that you can do to look at your own work-life balance. And I think I spoke to you that I don't like the term balance, in the sense that there's no magic perfect ratio of work-life balance. You have to find your own work-life balance, whatever that means for you. And there's a book by someone called Claire Fox called Work-Life Symbiosis. And I just like the notion that it's not about balance in a sense, because balance implies there's some perfect balance that you're aiming for. But it's about finding a way to combine your work responsibilities and your work life with your non-work life in a symbiotic way that works for you, that you're happy with and you're comfortable with. And I think we have to be a little bit careful not to prescribe to people that there's one magic way to live your life. You have to live the life in the way that suits you as an individual and your family and your setting and your needs and your goals and your ambitions. So we have to be careful people don't start feeling guilty that they're prescribed to, you must live your life like this, you must do it like this. You have to make those decisions for yourself. But I think there's quite a lot available. The one website I would strongly recommend is, it's called The Greater Good. Right. And it's a website hosted by Berkeley in the States. Okay. And that's got a lot of very useful, there's videos, books, recommendations. There's also things you can do in schools. There's things very much deliberately about education. And there's a website that goes with it called Greater Good in Action. Okay. And this is about actual specific activities and things that you can do for your well-being. And they are always provided with an explanation of what it is, why it works, and evidence that it works. So they cite research articles that support that this particular thing works. So that's a good place to start. A book that I absolutely love and would strongly recommend, again, meant for general education, but I love the title alone. It's called The Elephant in the Staff Room. And it's by a guy called Chris Eyre, E-Y-R-E. And that's a very good book about managing stress and well-being as a teacher. And I love it. I think it's a great book.
We were talking earlier in the episode, before we spoke to you, about the staff room. And actually, it's an interesting place, the staff room, because it's a place where you can get support, which obviously is a kind of element of being well-being. But it's also a place that can really stress you out, because everybody's kind of venting their problems at the same time.
I mean, it's actually quite a tricky thing, because one of the things is that to have a good whinge and a moan with somebody who can relate to what you're talking about, it's actually quite healthy. It's like flea picking.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's actually quite a good thing to get it off your chest with somebody who empathizes, but you have to be careful not to get into this downward spiral of a complaining culture. And sometimes staff rooms can breed this complaining culture, and it's good to be able to create that balance between getting stuff off your chest with somebody who can empathize, but then also reminding yourself of the positives in our job, why we like teaching, what we get out of it, the positive things, telling each other nice things that happened in our class, things that we're pleased with or proud of, things that give us a lot of satisfaction or motivating. So it's allowing ourselves the opportunity to have a good moan, because it's healthy and we need to get it off our chest. But also just not getting caught up in this focus on the negatives and getting in this complaining culture that can be a sort of downward spiral, but looking also at the positives and the good things about our work.
Fair enough. So go read that book, go visit that website, and they're good starting points for us to explore well-being. And of course, if people are interested in the topic of psychology and language learning and teaching, then they should of course buy your book. And read that from cover to cover. We'll put a link to it on the podcast website. Sarah, I begged 10 minutes of your time, and I've taken 20, so I shall leave you there, and I'm sure we'll come back again on this idea of 21st century life skills and whether that's working or not. But thank you so much for giving us some of your time today.
Not at all. Thank you so much for asking me. And if I can just say, if there is anybody that's working on issues of teacher wellbeing, or have got issues that they want to, stories that they want to share, I'm actually working on a book on this at the moment, about using well-being as a perspective for integrating in teacher development in a more holistic perspective. I'd be happy to hear from anybody who's got things they think, or ideas of things they think we should consider and include in the book. So anybody who wants to contact me with ideas that they think I should address in the book, then I'd be very grateful to hear from them.
And is that your email address?
Yeah, sarah.mercer@uni-grats.at.
Yeah, cool. And we'll make that available. I assume that's okay with you. We'll make that available on the website for people to go to and find if they want. So, Sarah, thank you so much. Go and enjoy your weekend, which I'm sure is going to be really busy. And thanks for your time for now.
Thanks so much. Take care, Shaun. Thanks very much. Bye.
I do find it interesting. It's a kind of a topic. I guess it's just something that because I've seen a lot of talks and listened to a lot of people. I find this idea of teacher well-being just something I've never really considered that much before. Perhaps it's just me not going down those routes. But this idea of I guess of reflecting on what I'm doing from a work-life point of view and from a stress point of view is just something I've never done. So I always find it fascinating. What is it? Have you always given it more credit to yourself, or Ceri, or?
Okay, well, supposedly, you and I probably don't think that way. Whereas millennials do.
Oh, I see. So it's back to the age.
The newer generation are thinking much more about work-life balance,
right?
Now, willing to stand up for their rights, as it were, a little bit more, and not accept things that maybe we as younger teachers would have. Ridiculously long hours, split shifts, travelling here, there, or whatever, which can be very much part of a language teacher's schedule, which I think really contributes to burnout, but then they're also, I think, more sensitive to any symptoms of burnout, and not that means that they'll cope with them better, but just that they maybe suffer them more. I don't know. There just seems to be a general sensitivity about it that maybe older managers, kind of putting myself into that category, I guess, maybe need to be more sensitive to as well. I don't know. Is it worse now than before, or is there just more of an awareness of the need for this balance?
That's an interesting question. I wonder. I don't know. It's I guess I wonder if it is generational with it, because I was kind of always, you do the work that was put before you, kind of thing. But I guess if you go back to state school teaching, what I find, both my sisters are in state education, and when I think about the length of their working days and what they do in their working days, it's just ridiculous. And and my sister's, my oldest sister's actually a school director, and she spends so little time actually dealing with what I would call education. It's all about all the other issues, almost all the therapy issues that we're talking about. So I can really imagine it. To me, a split shift is perhaps not in the same league, but it's one of those things. So I think, but obviously I think the 21st century, as people say, has led us to not have so much time. Strangely enough, we have all these devices that do things for us, but we seem to spend more time doing stuff, don't we? So I think that it is easy for that work-life balance. And certainly, I think as I've got older, I might have wanted more of a work-life balance, but that's simply because I can't keep up the pace anymore. I think that's anything to do with it.
That's a good point, Paul. I think it's something that we all try and move towards, isn't it? It's like at the beginning of your career, then you're quite willing to put up with conditions, but then you're always trying to work towards finding the schedule that works best for you, or the workload that works best for you. I guess that is something that you kind of get through experience as well. You have to kind of know your working self, don't you, to be able to find the answer to that too.
Yeah, I think I do find it fascinating area. I kind of stems back. I think, to me, as I said, I've seen a number of talks of it. I've seen Sarah herself give a couple of talks of it this year, and there's a quote in her talk, I can't remember who it's from, and she talks about teacher and learner well-being being two sides of the same coin. So if I don't look after my own well-being, then how am I able to, therefore, I guess, be that person to look after my students' well-being?
But there's that typical metaphor, isn't there, of the oxygen mask in the aeroplane, and that you should, make sure that you've got your oxygen mask on first before you help anybody else. It's always the same metaphor that's being used for parents and kids or teachers and their students that if you're not okay, then you can't help anybody else.
True. I'm just gonna. I guess we should be getting towards. I know it's a serious topic, but we don't. We obviously the podcast is only supposed to last the length of a commute. What else have we got? Keep learning, be active. Oh, and give to others. So it's always better to give than receive. It's a nice way to finish, perhaps.
Yeah, that's nice. Good. Do something nice for someone, and you'll feel good about it.
And you've done something nice today because you've stepped into Lindsay's shoes and provided a much saner option to talk to on this podcast. So I think
he doesn't listen to the end.
Oh no, I want him to listen to the end. Right, Ceri, thank you very much for your time. Go and enjoy a walk, and hopefully we'll see you on the podcast again soon. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye everyone. See you next time.
As your commute is coming to an end, here's an activity to do with your class. Ceri mentioned taking a breath in class, so here's a mindfulness activity on that idea for the Greater Good website Sarah spoke about. It encourages you to slow down and give students time to think. Number 1, explain to students. We know that we learn and teach better when we give ourselves time to think about the question before answering it. I will wait about 3 seconds after I ask a question before I call on anyone to answer. This will give you time to think about how you'd like to answer. I'll also give myself some time before I respond. 2. Each time you do your 3-second wait time, use it to mindfully take a nice deep breath. 3. If you're standing, notice the weight of your feet on the ground. 4. Allow your awareness to broaden so that you can take in the entire class. 5. Scan the class, noticing each student as they raise their hand, and choose one you may not have called much on lately. 6. As the student answers, listen mindfully and spend time considering it. You can find the instructions for these activities at our website, www.teflcommute.com. You've been listening to the TEFL Commute, an original podcast produced and presented by Lindsay Clanfield, Shaun Wilden and James Taylor. Don't miss out on any episodes by subscribing to us on iTunes and by visiting us at www.teflcommute.com.